Council Goal Update, Community Engagement, and this will be presented by our Assistant City Manager, Ty Brooks.
Thanks for having me. So I'm just here to give you an update. We checked in a few months ago on the council goal and helped kind of articulate a draft goal and some high-level strategies. So I just want to give you an update on where we are now and talk next steps. For anyone who's paying attention at home, this is related to the council engagement goal. So it's not specific to engagement around a particular project or plan tonight. This is really about engagement practices across the city more generally. So just want to make sure I make that clear to folks up front. So the goal that we set last time was to provide community-wide, consistent, and meaningful opportunities for residents to engage with their community and in city work. And like overarching strategies that we wanted to deploy to advance that goal is to evaluate what we do today. So that's the first step, right? Take a look at what type of outreach we're doing now and how is it meeting our goals, particularly those set forth in the vision. The second strategy is to standardize and enhance our outreach across the different departments. We're doing a lot of outreach all across the city on all types of things. So once we know what we're doing, we evaluate that, how do we standardize and enhance those efforts? And then last but not least, it seems like a little bit of an outlier, but based on where the conversation started, we wanted to make sure we maintain a focus on events. So our events are important to us. We believe they're an important way to bring people together in community, but we also know that they've taken a lot of resource. So how do we do both? How do we do the engagement we want to see and also continue to provide these opportunities for people to gather? Since we know that's important to engagement as well. So we called that out specifically. So, sorry it's green. I should have picked a better color, so I'll read it. This was in your staff report. I just want to give you a high-level sense of what we've been up to since we talked. So on the evaluation side, I'm going to spend more time talking about those in a minute. But the community survey, we actually did a Patikin Research Strategies, a polling firm, did a survey for the city in 2017. We are just contracting now to bring them back on board to reissue that survey. I'm going to talk to you more about that in a minute, so that we can get results back, top-line results in January, and a complete report out at the beginning of February. Timing of that is to make sure we have it early in the year, feeding into budget and all that good stuff. We also wanted to ask a third party. So I feel like I know everything, but it turns out I don't. So we are going to ask a third party, an outside entity, to help us evaluate our engagement. And so we initiated a contract with Portland State University on November 1st to help us do the evaluation work that we want to do. And I'm going to introduce those guys in a little bit. On the standardize and enhance side, we've been busy. So we have established a staff engagement task force. So much of the work that I need to do is related to the people of the city and having the people of the city have the tools and the knowledge that they need in order to be successful with engagement. And so I have a wonderful team now that met last week from across the city that are helping me dive into this and help make sure that the tools we create really do work for everyone. Those same folks actually went to International Association of Public Participation training last month as well. So we invested quite a bit of resource actually to send 5 staff people from the city to IEP2 training, which is awesome and is really going to serve us well into the future. We also have the wonderful new city leadership program, thanks to Anne and Christina and Stefan. I think we're on meeting 3, 4. So this is another thing that's really exciting that has happened since the goal was created in order to bring new folks into the city and up to speed on the work that we do to help cultivate those folks that can engage at that higher level. This was the boring one, but it's oh so important. So we had a database called ComContacts, which was an old Access database that literally could only work on like one computer. And so we'd set a goal to replace that by the end of the year, and thanks to Amy and Scott and Jason, that has now happened. So ComContacts is dead, it's over. We have a new volunteer and stakeholder database, which we're very excited about using and will help. Again, it's another one of those tools that we really think is going to help the city moving forward. This last one is, I didn't talk a lot about it last time, but I've been working to kind of restructure and add some capacity within the city in order to support this goal. So the way that that is shaping up right now is about to release a position specific to events. So events, I know we were really lucky to have Laura last year helping us with Carefree Sundays and a bunch of other things, and we saw a lot of value from that. So we want someone to help with events and volunteer recruitment and management. What that will allow me to do is create some more capacity in Jason Wax's position in order for him to take on a much more robust role with coordinating community engagement. So I'm really excited about this. We have a lot of transition to go. Jason's still doing solstice. So please don't talk to him about this right now. It'll make his head explode. But in terms of as a team, I think this will help us make sure that we continue to do the work we want to do, but also provide some more dedicated attention and support to all the staff across the city that are trying to do this work.
Can we have a moment of appreciation for the fact that Jason successfully lit the tree on Sunday?
Yes, and the tree lit. So everyone, the tree lit.
Everything worked.
And it was great. And I believe we have decided potentially it was the mayor's fault because Angel was there and it worked fine. So I'm just kidding.
Undoubtedly.
No, I'm just kidding.
May I add one
Yeah.
piece?
Yeah.
So if you go up to the contacts piece, I also just wanted to note that coming in this next year, we're also going to be having a one-stop shop for volunteer signups. It's a partnership in our IT department that'll make all these pieces actually fit together so that when somebody applies to volunteer, they click buttons, they get notices, they find out where, instead of Jason having to write a bunch of emails and try and keep track of everybody. So that's a part of this system as well.
Do volunteers, does that also capture people who apply to serve on our boards and commissions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Amy, is there anyone Amy's actually way smarter about this new system than I am. So is there anything you want to add?
Yes, the Contacts was the database for volunteers and all the boards and commissions information. So the new system that I am currently working on will be for especially those boards and other positions.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so let's dig in a little bit to evaluation. So as I mentioned, we are working with Portland State University. So Paul and Diane said I didn't need to bring them up, but they're going to wave at me if they feel like they want to come later. But this is Paul and Diane from Portland State. They are our primary staff people helping, and I've actually already jumped in. I said, you should come to an event. So I believe they both came to the Umbrella Parade last weekend to start seeing how things work in Milwaukee. But what we've specifically tasked them to do is look at our engagement and outreach over the past 2 years. We may extend a little bit into year 3 time frame. And what I want to know is the following. What type of engagement are we doing with city-led engagement efforts? So if you look at a good example of a city-led engagement effort is everything we did with South Downtown. That was a plan that was created by city staff. All of the notices were sent out, all of the tactics, the strategies, everything was deployed by city staff. We had no outside engagement support. What have we done with our outsourced public engagement? So the climate action plan is an example of something where we had part of our contract for that project. We had enviro issues, was a public engagement consultant. What does it look like? How consistent across all these different efforts is it when we hire a consultant to do that work? And then the third major component that they're doing is looking at best practices. So after they at the end, they do a literature review and kind of look, okay, these are the types of objectives you're trying to hit. What are some best practices that are being used in other communities? Now, overlaying all this is essentially demographics. So when we look at all those outreach opportunities, who is participating? Who's showing up to these things? Who isn't showing up and participating? What's the gap? And then on the best practices, what aren't we deploying? So we actually do a lot. And I'll get into the tactics here in a minute. The recent work that was done around council compensation and a citizen jury, not very many people are doing. We're one of the only cities right now. They're calling us to ask us about that. So we're deploying a pretty broad array of tactics around engagement. But this will help us see, okay, what are we missing? Are we overutilizing in some areas? So this work has, like I said, just begun. We're at the phase right now where we're kind of doing the data dump. So we have my staff task force, which is amazing, is helping gather all of the public engagement reports that are related to these different efforts and downloading them to the appropriate Dropbox location. I'm also having, there is some work that needs to be created that is particularly on the staff-led efforts. So police, for example, actually do a lot of engagement. So it's asking them questions, what type of engagement do you do? What does that look like? What kind of data do you collect? What kind of data don't you collect? Because at the end of the day, we might need to standardize, and I suspect we do need to standardize how we capture who we talk to, right? So this is where we are with this. We're looking at having, hopefully the report, I believe the schedule shows I'm going to be presenting that to you all in March, right? So we're in the data collection and refinement stage right now. Do you have any questions for me related to this work? Yes, no, maybe, no? Okay. All right.
I mean, just because I wasn't here for the 2017 survey, could you tell me a little more about what that was like and what we're redoing this time around?
I would love to. That's my next slide.
You're welcome.
So, thank you. Yeah, so this is the PSU stuff. Next up is the community survey. So we did use Patinkin Research last time. We're going to use them again. We are going to stick to these same general topics. So I have put community engagement up top, but downtown safety, utilities, city streets, code enforcement, information and community participation, future growth and development, overall perception and satisfaction with the city, and demographics. Now the demographics, I'm not asking you, it's just who are we talking to, and making sure we have a representative sample is what we're looking for there. This is what I'm planning to change. So last time we asked a lot about, we said city council, not city. I'm still talking about goals and issues that are related to city council goals, but I'm framing it as city input. And frankly, that's because your goals are your goals, and this is not a survey to figure out what your goals should be. This is a source of information that I will share with you to help guide whatever decisions we want to make from it. The next, we had some very specific questions in there about positions, like should we hire a second code enforcement officer, and specific events, should we do Milwaukee Days? Those to me at this point haven't been that helpful in terms of repeating them. What I want to get to is a baseline, and I can see over time how we're doing in different areas. And a one-off position or question about a position or an event doesn't serve that well, so I took those out. We did add a new question, a couple new questions about engagement, but one, the last time we were asking people how they got their information, and we would read off a list of things, the pilot, the website, all that stuff. This time I also am asking them how they give us information, how they provide feedback to us, what platforms they use, whether that's at their NDA meeting or coming to a boards and commission, coming to a council meeting. And then also asking that and how they feel heard. Do they feel like that information influences outcomes?
So it would be an open, will there be an option for also providing an open-ended targeting, asking people to provide some of that, what are we missing information?
Yeah, I have. Well, the first question is, what do you think the city should be working on? Mm-hmm. We have a couple different.
I guess maybe specific to this question, especially. How do you provide feedback to the city? How should we provide feedback to the city?
Or
Yeah,
are
I
you
can make-
asking
Yeah.
how are we not reaching them? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
How are we? Yeah.
What ideas do you have for additional?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me work with them on that. I got.
It would be more difficult because
Yeah.
it's not a multiple choice or it's not a checkbox option. It would be more open-ended, but.
I think I can add that. So I've got, what methods do you use to participate in or give your opinion to city decision makers? And I've got a really long list. And then I have kind of other at the bottom. So I can clarify that that's anything we didn't mention that you would utilize if available to you. Like kind of a catch-all end thing, so that if there's one thing that we should have listed that we didn't, or some way that they would have communicated with, given the feedback, I can make that work.
Yeah,
So,
and
okay.
if you could, I suppose if it's an online survey, maybe you could limit the number of characters, and that might actually get you some more consistent responses.
Yeah, this time we're actually doing, so this is, again, I just want to emphasize, this is a statistically valid
This is a
survey,
telephonic
and it's
survey.
phone, and it's a
Okay.
mix of cell phone, and it's going to be between a 12 to a 14-minute long survey
Oh,
of
wow.
400 people. So we had done an online component of it last time, and honestly, in some ways, I think that skewed some of the results. So this time, we really are trying to get at that, okay, what's a representative sample of our community? How plugged in are they? Because it is pretty easy, I mean, not easy, but we hear a lot from a lot of the same folks. So if we go out and it's kind of to get to that who aren't we getting to question. Because a lot of the people we talk to probably aren't getting information from any of these sources, and we kind of need to know that. So, but yes, I can rework that other part at the end to make sure it's more of open-ended. Yeah.
That raises a funny question in my mind of, sometimes people aren't getting information and they're okay with that?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
their overall feeling is that the city is pointing in the right direction, we're good with, whatever it is that you move forward with.
Like a box that says,
Yeah.
I don't need information, I'm good.
Yeah, I don't know.
And
I
that
don't
is-
know that it's important
no.
enough to worry about, but it just kind of,
I mean, that is part of what one of the main things this will give you is a right track, wrong track kind of gut check, right? Is the city focused on the right things or the wrong things? And sometimes people may be very open and willing to give us that feedback, but don't want to come to a council meeting, and it's still valuable for us to hear that
Right.
from them so that we can kind of incorporate that feedback into our work. So
Maybe a question about,
Yeah.
a question to grade the level of whether or not they receive enough information. I mean, that might be an easy
Yeah.
way to get at the same
yeah, that has a
thing
sort of,
without suggesting.
right. We just don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really, I think, regardless of whether or not you want to talk to me right now, I would love to just know if you want to, if there's something that comes up, how would you like to provide that feedback? If you want, because at some point, there's going to be something that touches on your life that you want to know about, most likely. And when that time occurs, would you like to go to the website and find it? Or would you like to
Yeah.
come to a meeting and learn more about it? And then also for the feedback one, it's if you've tried to communicate it, how did you feel like that went? That's more open-ended. So I think it's a nice little trifecta of where do you learn about what's going on? How do you tell us what you think about it if you want to tell us about it? And how do you feel that we do with receiving your input? So I think hopefully it'll give us a little picture of where people are coming from on that, which will be helpful. We had a question in there related to housing affordability. It was much more, should we be working on this? Kind of a question. We still have a question related to that, but this is more that baseline tracking. Like, is housing affordability getting better or worse over time? Like, we sort of jumped to the conclusion that you don't think it's affordable, which we have data that shows that was based in fact. But this is sort of just that baseline question to track our progress over time. Also, we didn't have any questions related to climate action or our tree canopy reforestation goals, so I added, Peter gave me some language related to that so we could capture people's feelings or interest in those topics as well. So that's what's different. Does that get at the question? Does that get kind of what you were looking at? Okay. Any other questions about the survey? Yeah.
When are you doing it?
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. So I've gotten all the director input, I think. I'm good. Everyone, I had a deadline for that, and then I'm talking to you all tonight to see how you're doing. I'm hopefully giving the final set of revisions to the consultant tomorrow. There's a chance I may be able to get out into the field the week of the 20th. I have to get it done before the 20th. I got to work with them. It'll either happen in the next week or so, or will happen right after the first of the year on the 6th. My main deadline is I'm trying to get top line results back by the third week in January. So soon. I'm not going to do it during when school's out or closures. I'm going to avoid that window of time. But if I can get it out before, I will. If I can't, it's going to go out January 6th.
So the phone calls would be made,
The 16th through the,
Yeah, it would be
how many days will calls be made?
3 days.
3 days.
3
Just
days.
until they get to a number that they need to hit to make it.
What is
Yeah.
that number?
400. Yep. Yeah.
And if it's, well, I guess we'll just know if it's demographically skewed somehow, because.
Well, that's
they
part of the
have-
direction I'm giving them is it has to meet. It's not just who they get, it's that they get a representative sample.
Okay.
So they have to
It's actually why we're paying
Yeah.
for a survey, is to avoid that problem.
Yeah. So I think chances are, I mean, I was trying to be pretty aggressive. I think most likely we're out the week of the 6th. I think I probably am not that good because I got to still officially get them under contract, but I'm working on it. So most likely the calls will be going out the week of the 6th is my guess. Yep.
That's probably, I mean, people will not be so frantic the week of the 6th.
Yeah.
As they might be next week.
Yeah.
The reason that Kelly's been rushing this, in full disclosure, is that you actually have your first budget meeting the third week in February as a part of the CUAB discussion that we're doing a joint meeting between those agencies. So we were trying to get this to you before you answer a question about road money. Because last time we received a lot of data that said people's streets were a concern. Residential streets are concerned. Do you want to have a conversation about residential streets before we go into the budget? So it's stuff like that that she's trying to provide you with the information as fresh as possible going into that discussion.
So that's where we are with that. Any other questions on the survey? Okay. Okay, so my one handout. I have talked a lot about how we're pegging a lot of this work to the International Association of Public Participation Spectrum and Values, but I never really talked about what that meant. How many of y'all are actually familiar with the spectrum? You are? Okay. So my goal is for you and everyone who works with the city to start kind of, I guess, talking more in these terms. So I'm going to spend some time just kind of sharing tonight what the spectrum is. So there's kind of no one right or wrong way to do engagement in terms of the level that you do. So I'll talk about what these different levels mean. But the most important thing to do is to decide what you're going to do up front and tell everybody what it is, right? So that's where it's important that we start training ourselves to ask these questions from the outset. We do a lot of it well now, but again, I think we can get better. So let's just kind of walk through the spectrum. So when you start, so inform is kind of it's not the lowest level, but it's kind of the lowest level of engagement. And your goal in that, at the inform level, is to make sure that you're keeping the public apprised and that they have balanced and objective information to help them in understanding the problems, the alternatives, and the solutions. And the promise that we're making to the public when we're informing them is to keep you informed. This is a valuable goal. This is probably 80% of what we do. And it's super important. And there's nothing wrong with just informing people. It's okay, right? But you just need to be open about the fact that's what I'm doing. I'm here to provide you with information. I run into this a lot, like with capital projects, right? If I'm showing you 90% plans, I'm showing you 90% plans. Not a whole lot that we're probably going to be able to change about the project right now, but it's still important for me to be able to show you what's happening and answer questions that you have about it. The next level is consult. So this is where you are asking for feedback, but you're largely controlling kind of the options that are being shared with the public. You're taking that feedback, you're telling them how those options incorporate their feedback. You're reporting back. You're saying, hey, you asked me to do X. I did Y, but I heard you, and here's what you said. The next level up is involve. So this is where you're having those folks a little more involved in developing those options that they're considering. And you're making an intention that their feedback will be incorporated into the options that they consider. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're making the final decision, but that it's that next level up. The next level is collaborate. So this is where, and planning oftentimes does this really, really well, like where you bring them in really early, you're helping set the goals, you're helping chart the vision, you're really integrated into the paths and the options that you're considering. And the overall effort is including those recommendations to the maximum extent possible. The last one is empower. So this actually doesn't happen a lot in government practices, in many ways because it's impossible, because you have a set of local, state, or federal rules that you have to follow. That means you can't just hand it over and say, decide how you want to get rid of the contamination in Kellogg Lake, right? That would be a lie. Like, that would not be honest on our part. It would not represent the regulatory challenges or limitations on that outcome, so we don't do that. But you all have done this recently. So the citizen jury was an empower exercise. Sending something out to the ballot for the library, that's an empower exercise. That is completely handing the decision-making authority over to the public. And there are times when you can do that. I'm showing you this just because we get to, when we're starting a process, there's different templates that we're going to be making for staff, different questions we can ask ourselves about where on the spectrum we should probably be. But it's pretty easy to kind of dive into a tactic before you've assessed what your level of engagement really might make the most sense. So you can be like, okay, well, we're going to form a committee. Well, if you're going to form a committee, what level of empowerment are we giving to that committee, right? So I'm giving you this now because, well, I want to hear what you're thinking about it. It kind of blew my mind when I learned it 10 years ago or whatever. It's changed how I think about everything that I do, is to try to make myself ask and answer this question from the very outset so that when I'm asking people to be involved in something, I know why I'm asking them to be there. And we will start probably talking to you, or I'm hoping, if this is successful, staff will start talking to you more in these terms when they're asking you for input. You know, like, what kind of engagement level do you want for this? We're recommending we go involve. Are you feeling like this is more of a collaborative process? And all I want to underscore is it's not bad to pick involve. It's not bad to pick inform, right? If that's what we're going to do, that's what we just need to decide and let people know that. And it just needs to be tailored to the issue, the challenge that we're facing in the best way possible, because you really can wear people out. So if we make everything collaborative, they're so tired. They can't actually weigh in on all those things. You know, then we have everybody we have a million committees and we're fully empowering them to do all the things. They may not even want that. But there are times where it has to be at that level or we won't reach the successful outcome. So it's different. Every project or plan is different. But this is the frame that now our trained folks are using to kind of think about these different things. Do you have any questions about any of that?
I have just an impression and maybe sort of a takeaway for myself is, trying to maybe incorporate this language a little bit more intentionally too. Us as counselors, as we're talking with the community, if we're all using the same vocabulary, that will be really helpful in providing clarity, in the community.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about actually doing a little more training for all of you around some of this, and we can do that in the commissions.
Yeah.
Just so that you all, even walking through multiple projects, so you can think through each of those steps and make some conscious decisions about why and in which circumstances you're making which choices.
Yeah.
And understanding some of the, for example, your Kellogg example, there were many other examples where, the decision is made for us. And so being really careful about the language that we use to describe the process, I think is important.
Yeah, and the consult, involve, collaborator, the places, that middle part, I think, is where it's easy for us to get messy. And I love the idea of having some opportunities for us all to walk through examples of past decisions and what those were or what future decisions might be, so we can really embody what the differences are. Because I'd like to be cleaner about that. I think it absolutely helps build trust in the community and clarifies expectations all around, and is just really a great tool for improving our ability to communicate with the public in a really meaningful way.
So questions I hope you might ask when staff are coming up to talk to you about different things in engagement. This is a part of helping you do an engagement plan. So what level of engagement are we targeting and why? What makes the most sense here? This is what we're hearing from you all. Are a really valuable resource of information for us in terms of what might be tripping a lot of concern within the community that we may not have heard at the staff level yet. It's like, hey, you're actually viewing this as a consult exercise. Based on what I'm hearing, it's not a consult exercise. There's too much concern. So, that's the kind of feedback to you that's helpful, I think, for us to hear when we're communicating with you.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
In every single one of those situations, but the middle three, I guess, more. You know, when we have a citizen advisory committee that we've formed, like when we did the vision, when we did, now that we're doing the comp plan, the climate action plan, all that
Housing.
stuff, that was basically a collaborate. When I'm reading this, I'm sort of taking it as, okay, all 20,000 people, right? Which, in so many instances, is going to be impossible.
I think, so it doesn't have to be, so that's a part of, so again, that's why it needs to be an overall strategy, and you might be deploying different tactics within your overall engagement and communication strategy. You may have a need to inform 20,000 people, but a part of how you're going to develop the proposal or the plan or the policy that you're creating is through having a citizen advisory committee, which is a collaborative body that is empowered by city council to have a certain set of authorities and autonomy to make recommendations. But you still have to have there's no citizen advisory committee that's going to solve all of your community engagement needs, right? There's going to be, you may have to do an online survey, you may have to do other things to kind of wrap around that committee. But I think the first question you ask yourself is, do I need that level of collaboration on this project? And if you're like, yeah, okay, what's a good tool to use? All right, a citizen advisory committee would be a really good way because we could get committed, involved people to help participate from the very beginning about where this process is going to go. And the city has done a lot of that. So it's not like I'm saying something that that doesn't happen.
There's some lines that if we were having this discussion, I'd probably, in the future, add time commitment for each of these levels goes up, the further to the right you go. So the citizens jury gave 4 days of their lives to answer one question. It was a really big question, but it was one question. With a collaborative process, we've spent 3 years now working on the vision and the comp plan pieces. So it's just making sure that we can't spend all of our time and empower and collaborate because it's just too costly and it's too time consuming and you get to that fatigue, both with staff and with the community. So it's making sure we're also being somewhat intentional every single time we do it so that the things that need it the most are the ones that we're doing it with.
Yeah, absolutely. This was my question. So when I went to the conference in Nashville with Ann for the International City Managers, I basically just dove into community. I went to every community engagement thing I could find just to try to get my brain wrapped around and refocused on this topic. And I went to this one that was all about wicked problems and a wicked problems mindset. And it was really interesting because it's about when you actually just have conflicting values. So there are a set of problems and there's really not there's not a solution to it. That you have opposing values. It's not like if you keep talking forever, you're going to make someone who wants to protect,
Makes me think of committees online.
So the answer to those kind of very heavy, wicked, value-intensive conversations is relationships. The only way you build relationships is time and space and a smaller group of people that get to know one another. And you can't do that on everything. You can't do it. You can't ask people to spend a week of their life or 9 months of their lives forming that relation on every problem. So we have to be very strategic about how we triage our engagement strategies so that we're doing the right level on the right thing. It doesn't mean we'll always get it right, but you do want to preserve those uber time and resource intensive strategies for the wicked problems, for the big problems, to the extent that you can. And so, because I asked that question, I was like, so how do I pick? Like, tell me when I've got one of those, and then I'm gonna, because I can't do that on everything. And he was like, hire us. And I was like, that's not the answer. So, but to go to the next thing, that is kind of the struggle that staff is in. So, I need an engagement plan for the engagement plan. And because I keep talking about everybody needs an engagement plan. And I need one for this effort. And I will tell you most of my work on the engagement plan is internal coordination and making sure I have buy-in from the people that I need to deploy these tools. It's not that, the public is so important but I think they care about projects and plans and deliverables and how we do it, not as much this, but that could change over time. But so a lot of the heavy lifting and engagement I want to do now is on the internal side to make sure that we can be consistent. I'm going to hire somebody new so that you don't have to hear from much as me in a few months. We're going to get the survey. We're going to go through the budgeting process. We're going to make sure that our partners at Portland State have what they need in order to give us an accurate portrayal of our work. This, I don't know if it'll click. What does it say?
Just click OK.
It says, yeah.
It says opening.
Am I
think.
needing glasses? Okay, so I got laser surgery, and if I have to get glasses anytime soon, I'm real mad about it. Another thing that I got from my wonderful trip to Nashville was we are not the only people that are working on engagement. And in fact, cities all across the country are grappling with how to do engagement well and coming up with standardized ways of getting folks involved. A lot of folks have a different problem. People want to be involved, which is great. I'm actually really excited that that's not a problem that we need to solve for. The fact that people show up and want to communicate with us is awesome. So we don't want to break that. Mm-hmm. A lot of what's happening in other communities, frankly, is they get to a place where they're having protests and riots. There's police issues. I mean, there's a lot of things, and they're dealing in a very tense situation. So I feel very blessed that we get to have this conversation now. But one of my friends that I met while I was there, he's like, I just did this. I made a toolbox. You should use it. And our toolbox isn't going to look just like this, but I just want to show you where I want to get to. I would love for our staff to just have, I wonder if it's going to show you. I want it to be so easy for them, right? I want to have a matrix that shows you the different engagement levels. You can ask yourself some questions about what types of issues you're working on, where decisions are being made, so you can triage kind of what engagement level you think makes the most sense. I want you to have a nice, easy list of tools that you can pick and deploy about whether, if you want to do an open house, what that would look like, you want to do a workshop, who are some audiences. They have a nice little handy kind of organizations in the area that you should consider reaching out to and including in your stakeholder outreach. I think we can make that easier for people. They have a bunch of media stuff. Probably won't include that here, but we will have like what our communications platforms are. So this is Facebook. This is all the, these are the different resources you have in terms of getting the word out. And then this is all about, okay, I want to have an event. Who can help me? What does it look like to have a good event? This is where you would say, hey, do you have translation services? Do you have, is this one where you should be considering offering daycare or childcare services in order to get folks to your event? So anyway, this, again, it's not, ours is going to be different. It'll work more for City Hall. But when I say internal, this is the kind of internal product that I want to have, because what we are blessed to have is we have a city full of people who actually believe quite a bit in engagement, take it very seriously, and want to do well. And they need to know what target they're trying to hit. And they need to know what tools they have, and they need to make sure they have the right skills in order to be able to deliver on this expectation. And so I'm excited. I think I'm really glad you picked this goal. It's a great time to have selected it, so thank you very much. We are making progress. I'd say we're 25% in, I think. We have a long way to go, but that's where we are.
So I noticed that example, he did consult, inform, consult, and collaborate, and didn't do the involve.
Yeah.
And when I was looking at the 5, I was sitting there thinking about the comp plan and and all of the public meetings and and was it involve or was it collaborated? It was somewhere in between, and I thought it was interesting that they didn't even use the involve here, because I do think there's a lot of overlap or whatever between the involve and the collaborate.
Yeah, those two blur a little bit just because it's about what you do. It's about how involved you are in developing the options almost.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they clearly narrowed it down to these 3. Yeah. So,
I also think that they probably didn't have a council who was willing to give a big decision over to a group of 18 people and say, go talk about this on air for 4 days. And I think that that's something that's unique also about this team, is that the empower piece actually can show up on ours, whereas there are a lot of city councils where that would not be there. So we will definitely be including it in our list.
Can I ask that
Please.
these materials, once you have created this manual, which I think is a great idea, end up in the training manual for new city councilors?
Yes.
Good idea.
Thanks.
Yes, you can have it all.
It's only 860
After,
pages.
after I make them.
Right.
After
It
I
should
make
be
them, yeah.
Well, and it would be a good piece for the next round of the
Leadership.
leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
And last but not least, I've mentioned it briefly, but I've never said it, I think, at a council conversation. But our neighborhood district associations and our boards and commissions are really important engagement centers for us. And so what we'd like to do is have some kind of a workshop with them after the first of the year as well to talk about what's working and not working for them, get some kind of values level information, particularly about the NDA grant program. What are those funds being used for? What could they be helpful with? All that kind of stuff. So have a real platform where we can share, see, same thing. What tools do you have access to? What don't you have access to? What are we making that could apply and be helpful to you in terms of how you engage with your membership? So that is just another next step for me early in next year, is to try to get all those, to do more of like a workshop. And it wouldn't just be for leadership, it would be for anyone who's participating, anyone who's interested. Like, are you interested in an NDA or a board or commission, but you don't know what that is? How do you want to be involved? You could sign up for the leadership. It's more just like a portal. So that's, yeah.
Is our survey going to ask people what they know about their NDA?
It's going to ask them if it's a source of information and if it's a way they provide input.
Okay.
Yeah, and it will ask them, and the events question is reframed to ask about the different city events, but also neighborhood, NDA concerts. And so it will be asked in terms of, is this a place you get information from? And is this where you kind of learn what's going on in the city?
I mean, I've talked to a couple people lately who have no clue that they have an NDA.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I do feel like, how do we get that? Yeah. I'd like to know how pervasive that is, I guess,
Yeah.
Well, when I first moved here, I had no idea for about 5 years that there were things called NDAs.
Yeah.
Nobody ever reached out to me, and there I was, as involved as I was with the Chamber of Commerce. I knew about CPOs, because I heard from them, but I did not know about NDAs.
Yeah.
Wasn't in my background.
I was at the Historic Milwaukee Association meeting last night, and they were having a conversation about how they would like to do more to reach out, since there, are some new apartments coming in, and they know that they'll have an influx of new neighbors. They are definitely looking for resources and training, so I know this is a going concern with the neighborhood associations.
Yeah, I think, I'm excited about that one. I think there's a way for us to add some value and to be helpful to them. Which can hopefully have a multiplier effect, and bring even more people into those groups to help inform more conversations. But also just for us to know, we rely pretty heavily on transmitting information through the NDAs, so I need to know how well that's working and if people are getting information through that venue. So, that's it. Do you guys have any other questions,
It's really
thoughts,
good work.
concerns?
Really comprehensive, much more than I would have thought for the topic of community engagement. So it's really far-reaching and I think really crucial. Thank you.
Something for us all to ponder as we're approaching budgeting. We brought this up a couple of years ago when Haley and I attended the participatory budgeting all day long seminar. It is exactly the empower piece, and if we need a refresher on that, we could get somebody to come in and do that. But it's a good process that allows everybody, and different cities do it differently. Some cities do it with just young people. They're the only people that are asked to engage on spending whatever, $100,000 or what are people under 21. Other cities do it only on parks issues. Other cities, everybody does it differently. But it's a pretty fascinating concept that I think the goal is eventually to have it become more and more and more part of how governments potentially could work. And it would be interesting for us to explore that a little more. So if there is interest, I can reach out to the folks in the Portland metro region who are doing that work.
I think the only pieces that I would make sure that you're considering as you're thinking about this is the citizen jury, Healthy Democracy, took about $35,000 in grant funding in order to really make it a robust and positive process. When I was speaking to one of the consultants who came in to actually watch them go through that process for their own learning and growth, there are groups that are different and maybe less robust in terms of the cost, but it's still going to cost us some money, and we can do that. But I just want to make sure you're aware that to be respectful of the process, is probably at least $15,000. The only other thing that I would add is that this is Bonnie's first budget, so just remember that as well. I
Well,
think
at
she's up
what
for the
point
game,
would
but-
you do this in the process? Are we too late for this budget
Well,
cycle?
not necessarily. We could literally say, we are setting aside $150,000, 50 to be used for the process, 100 will be the amount of money they have to spend. And then we will do a participatory budgeting process next summer or next year. Or something.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be, okay.
It's just, we're saying that's a thing, we're gonna do it.
Right now, your goals are getting 125 per year. That is tight, just as a reminder. So if you're doing that, it would probably be as the money for a goal that you would be moving entirely to go into something like that per year. Especially with us buying a new city hall right now.
I love the idea. I wonder if it wouldn't be better suited for the next budget cycle, because we will have been through so much great work around community engagement, and I think we'd be perfectly poised to do it justice and do it well.
And maybe start it like
Sooner.
a year ahead of the budget or
Right.
something instead of, yeah.
So
Do a supplement.
why don't I ask Amy, who's taking minutes right now, to put something onto the council forecaster for basically this time next year to start a discussion? And that way, if you are interested, that's plenty of time for us to build it into a budget, to talk about what the expectations would be, and to include it in the primary funding that we looked at for the next financial process.
Amy, reach out to me and I'll get you the names of the people that are doing this, just in case
Yeah.
I'm not around.
Well, and I was, Healthy Democracy and I've had this discussion, so I'll also probably reach out to them, because they really did an excellent job and learned a lot, and I appreciated all their service. So we'll reach out to them as well.
And again, I guess just to go back to my earlier comments about, we should need to be really clear about what the goal for engagement is around our budgeting process itself and what we hope to get from it, and then kind of evaluate how much, like, a participatory budgeting tool could help us reach the engagement goal. Like, just kind of think about it in those terms. I think that would be helpful.
So basically what you're telling us is that the conversation we just listened to for an hour, we now should apply.
Yeah, what is our goal for the budget
Yeah.
in terms of engagement? What do we want to accomplish? And then how could a higher level of engagement play out within an overarching engagement plan? And then what does that look like? And I think learning more about an empowerment tool that could apply to budgeting would be helpful to learn about.
And I would love to involve the budget committee in that conversation, because I think we've got a lot of really smart people on that committee who
Yeah.
might have some good ideas and input.
Well, and that is one of the unique things about this state that doesn't occur in other states. You don't usually have community members who sit on your budget committee with you in order to make those decisions with the entire council for every single dollar you spend. So it is an interesting question. We'll make sure when we couch this in the staff report coming back in a year that we ask that question of you and make it a broader discussion with the budget committee as well.
And I think, I don't know, I can talk to PSU friends, but again, they're also looking at best practices as a part of their report. So if there's some thing that we should be kind of learning more about, they maybe could point us in that direction. So, thanks. Okay.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, our next council goal update will be climate action, which will have Peter is still here. I was like, where'd Peter go? Peter Passarelli and Natalie Rogers. You know if there's an extension cord in here?
There should be, I can go find one.
Well, there's a ton of them.
No, those are these guys.
Oh, these are the microphones, oh.
What are you, is your,
And there's
It's
no
gonna, it's not gonna
power.
make it through the hearing, for sure.
oh, no, we're looking for an extension cord.
I am cold, though.
I am cold.
Yeah, I've been wearing a puffy
Angel
coat.
still has her coat on.
Okay.
I've worn my New England wool
Yeah,
sweater.
I wish I could wear
Handed by a
wool.
friend.
Yeah, I have a long sleeve sweater over a long sleeve sweater.
So we're ready to
We are, ready to rock and roll.
Okay. Well, good evening, Mayor Gamba and council. I'm Peter Passarelli, the Public Works Director, and with me tonight is Natalie Rogers, our Climate Action Sustainability Coordinator. Tonight, we're going to give you a brief update on our climate action plan, where we are, and have a discussion about our goals. And also sort of talk a little bit about the year in review, what's happened on Earth over the last year.
We'll summarize it too.
Oh.
So, I've got a few things that I wanted to highlight. What's happened? Why do we have a climate action plan? Why is it important? Why is it urgent to take action? So I wanted to review some of the things that have occurred over the last year
Thank you, Peter.
to make people understand why we're doing what we're doing. And then I'll turn it over to Natalie for a good news on what we're doing and what goes ahead. So, lots of reports came out this past year. And I go back to October 2018 with the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming. That report indicated that our temperature is headed to 1.5 degrees Celsius increase somewhere between 2030 to 2052. It's probably closer to the 2030, if not even before that.
Probably.
The U.S. Global Change and Research Program reported in their fourth National Climate Assessment, this is the U.S. Climate Assessment, that climate change is drastically exacerbating existing vulnerabilities in marginalized and disadvantaged communities, as well as other communities in the United States that are likely going to present challenges to human health, quality of life, and how our economy grows. January 2019, the U.S. Energy and Information Administration reported that global greenhouse gas emissions increased by 3% globally, the largest jump since 2010. I will report that rate of increase has gotten a little smaller this past year. I think they're thinking it's going to be about 0.6% increase. And it looks like because of the decrease in the use of coal in the United States, that the United States actually going to see a slight decrease in greenhouse gas emissions to about 1.7%. But with that decrease in coal, there's been also an increase in natural gas use of methane. The United Nations had a report in May of 2019 that indicated that there's over 1 million different species of animals and plants that are threatened with extinction, and its extinction are accelerating. I don't know if you recall what happened over the summer in Greenland. End of July, early August, Greenland had one of the highest rates of melting that's occurred in human history. In fact, on one day in late July, over 12.5 billion tons of ice melted into the ocean on a single day. And in the month of July, over 197 million tons of ice. Those are just enormous amounts of ice. And in fact, I think it was estimated that the ice melt in the month of July increased sea level rise by about 0.5 millimeters over the entire.
In a single day.
Well, that was for
For
the
a
entire
single
month,
month.
for that single month. The past 5 years have been the hottest on record. September and October have been the hottest months on human record of this 2019, in fact. So things are starting to accelerate. Things are getting bad. There's some progress made in some areas. Right now, there's meetings in Madrid to talk about the climate. The United States has a delegation there. The United States, unfortunately, has pulled out of. President Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Agreement. But we do have a delegation over there trying to make things, amend things, and make things, move things forward. And these are some bad things here, and I just wanted to highlight that. This is why we have a climate action plan.
Which one of those reports, I forget which, I read parts or a lot of, most of those, but one of them outlined that the last time that CO2 levels were at this level was however many millions of years ago, or not CO2 levels were at this level, and that sea level was 10 to 20 meters higher during that period of time than it is today. So we're not experiencing it yet because of the lag, right? It takes a while for all that ice to melt. But if we were to just stay at the CO2 level we are at currently today, the oceans will rise 10 to 20 meters.
Meters, not feet.
Meters.
I actually had read just finished reading a book called Timefulness, which is about geology and sort of comparing sort of the geologic changes on Earth versus the changes that man's causing on Earth. And one of the things that caught my eye were a couple statistics in that book. And one of them that said over the last 18,000 years, the average rate of increase in CO2 has been 0.006 parts per million. So that's over the last 18,000 years. That's what the average rate of increase has been. Since 1800, it's been 0.5 parts per million. Since 1960, it's been 1.5 parts per million. And since 2000, it's been 2 parts per million. So this year, in fact, I think in May was the all-time record. I think it was like 415 parts per million in CO2 measured in Hawaii. So it keeps creeping up and up, and yeah.
But there's good news.
It better be really good news. Natalie.
We have a climate action plan, and we're doing something about it for Milwaukee. There is a lot of bad news that's going around, but there's also opportunities. I heard a really good quote at the climate reality training I was at, and they were talking about reframing it because it could cause, a lot of this bad news causes eco-anxiety. It paralyzes people. It scares people. Mm-hmm. And so it's better for us to frame it as this is an opportunity for humanity to improve. We went through an industrial revolution. We've been through many revolutions which have benefited society. Now we're into the sustainable revolution. And there's a lot of opportunities on the horizon for us in our community. So I just wanted to remind us, and this what Peter shared does, remind us that these timelines are very important for us to meet them, if not exceed them. 2035 net zero electricity, 2040 net zero from building energy, and 2050 a completely carbon neutral city. And the and I also, 40% can't be covered by 2040, because I think that's as equally important. That's one of the easiest things that we can do as a mitigation action for climate. And the bullets on the right, those are the topics within our climate action plan. And so we've been doing a lot for all these different topics. And I'm just going to share some photos with you, because I know we shared kind of an extensive document with some of the great stuff that our teams and staff have been working on. So I like pictures a lot more. So you heard from our friends at PGE about the smart grid test bed. There's been a lot of work on energy efficiency and working to strengthen our partnership with our utilities to offer programs like this to start curbing some of the energy use that we're using, so that way we can bring more renewables online to decrease carbon emissions. Building energy is the largest sector of carbon emissions in Milwaukee. A lot of that can be solved by just working with our utilities and actually at the source, decreasing those carbon emissions, reducing the amount of actions that community residents have to make. The smart grid test bed allows us to help do that, because it starts to help us allow the grid to be more flexible with renewable energy. Leading Library, it has a lot of energy efficiency improvements in the library. There's solar panels on it. It's a showcase for what buildings can be in our community.
Are we gonna have signage in there about some of that? Interpretive signage of some sort?
I believe so, but I can't answer that tonight. I'll look at it.
Seems like we should.
Damien did, I did talk to Damien, I followed up with Damien as well today about the HVAC system in there, and he did say it was an electric heat pump system.
Good. Good to
So
know.
I did follow up with him.
We have Green Future Impact. So this is a really great development in our region, where essentially large customers of PGE can subscribe to 100% local renewable generated energy. We're going to talk about today some of the trickiness around talking about renewable energy in the terms. But the great part is Green Future Impact checks almost every box. It's locally generated. It's a bundled rec. It's a great product. There's also a lot of, Milwaukee has a strong subscription rate to PGE's other renewable products, Green Source and Clean Wind, so that's an advantage.
And I was just going to say that Green Future Impact, so that's the product that we signed up for this past summer with PGE to cover our local government load. So.
But don't I remember in your staff report that there's 19% residential are signed up for renewable, but only 2% of business?
It's about 24-ish% of residents are in the Green Source program. About 2% of customers of businesses are signed up for the Clean Wind product.
So how do
Well, part of that is because there's a premium when you're
Right.
signing up for these renewable products. The great part about Green Future Impact is that premium is significantly less than the other options that have been on the market. And that just indicates that cheaper renewables are in the future, so making that business case hopefully will be easier for them. And then, as you guys are aware, we've been spending a lot of time on home energy score. There's a few in our next staff report bringing that out. There's a few great studies that have been done that have been proving that residential energy disclosure is actually changing the market, and it's for the better. And so we're going to be excited to share those, but that's actually now going to be a really a confirmed energy efficiency option for communities. Also, Branch Out Milwaukee is now live at trees.milwaukeeoregon.gov. So if people are interested in viewing our canopy right now in Milwaukee, they're able to go on and play around with some of those toggle socioeconomic data as well as canopy data. This is going to be a great tool for our city staff to start planning on where planting should be in Milwaukee to be the most equitable and strategic. It's also just a fun tool to play around with. And that is live. There's a link on our urban forest page that people can click through as well.
And we're working with our community engagement staff to make the rest of the community aware of that. So.
Same with our story maps. That's another cool thing that we've gotten, our climate story map, as well as our public works story maps.
I had a little trouble getting that to work, I'll tell you.
The story maps?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they can be kind of laggy, so it works through ARC Online, which is an Esri product, so it's actually not held on city servers, so it's just talking to a lot of different servers. But did you have an issue accessing it, or actually just scrolling through
Yeah,
it?
it just kind of went, and then it kind of opened a map, and then it didn't do it. Yeah, I couldn't get it to move or to do
Was this
anything.
before or after you got a new router?
This was yesterday, so after I got a new router.
I'll double check to make sure that they're working all right, and if not, we'll figure out how to troubleshoot that. Thank you for letting me know. And then just a whole bunch of other great things going on. So in the upper left corner, the mayor and I attended a Clackamas solar workshop. So Clackamas County is working on their climate action plan, and we've been in discussions with them about how the city can help them out in their climate action planning efforts. We've also been partnering more with the county and seeing them at a lot of workshops and other climate and sustainability related events. We've been doing a lot of outreach and tabling, so pretty much whenever there's an opportunity to have a climate action brochure and urban forest information or any other information about clean energy products from PGE, we try to be there, including the 2019 Earth Day Wichita Park grand opening. We had a Friends of Trees event, which you can see in the center there. That was a tree planting that was really successful. And then we also had our Arbor Day celebration in October. We passed out quite a few trees, and I heard the rain, sun, hail, thunder, all of the above. But I've heard great things about the event, and that's just what comes with a fall planting.
I think that
fall
that
weather.
picture represents the full attendance for that.
Well, I think there are a few.
No,
There were a
be
few
more
more
than that.
people.
And it wasn't bad weather, was it?
There
Wasn't
was-
bad weather.
We had a couple,
We had some thunder.
we had some thunder and some
Yes.
rain, yeah.
She was just so involved in planting.
Yeah,
that,
I
her
was
mind
like-
was on that tree.
It was good though.
It was, yeah.
There was thunder.
And then, so another great thing, so, we have been working with PGE. We had our Electric Avenue grand opening event. We've had a couple ride and drives in Milwaukee with Fourth Mobility for EV promotion. We also currently have a Drive Change Grant Fund application in the PGE process. That's to get a public fast charger at our Public Works campus, which would help kind of close that charging gap in East Side Milwaukee.
And there's also an application in for an EV for the community engagement staff, I think for the event staff as well.
Yeah. And then our fleets team has been doing a great job, and Peter and Damien have been doing a great job at trying to electrify our own fleets. So there are some new EVs that are going to be coming to our own fleets in the next year or so, and we also have conversations with PGE about how to electrify the rest of our fleet as well. There's a lot of movement with community groups. Milwaukee Environmental Stewards Group, we've been helping them along and talking to them about promoting their own. They really focus on removing some solid waste from the waste stream, keeping stuff like polystyrene and plastic out of the waste stream and out of the environment. And so we've been talking to them about ways that they can have styrofoam collections. So they actually have been working with Clackamas County and Exceed Enterprises, which is a nonprofit, to do a styrofoam collection site. And so the city's going to be helping them with some promotional efforts of that site. And then the Clackamas Climate Action Coalition really started kicking off. They had a meeting, oh my gosh, was that last Monday? The mayor was also there, and I've had a lot of great responses from those community members about ways that we can help them both be advocates for Clackamas Climate Action Plan, but then also ways that we can just start to build that relationship with community members, especially community members who have great ideas and are passionate about climate action. Another fun thing that we did over the summer too is that we gave a tour to about 20 or so folks from Northwest Jesuit Volunteer Corps about the different sustainability projects happening in the city. So we actually had Julie and Lawrence, our natural resources coordinator, Jerry Sunny, our environmental services coordinator, and myself walk around and talk about trees, stormwater, and some climate action projects in the community. And they really enjoyed that opportunity to learn about some of the stuff happening in the city.
And just, I believe they have a campus or a location in Milwaukee,
Yes.
so it wasn't a completely random outreach.
No. They're on Harrison, I believe.
Yeah, they're already
Yeah.
Harrison, yeah.
And they were great, and they do a lot of volunteering, but then also environmental advocacy in the region, which is awesome. And they really liked it, and they asked to do another one this coming year. And so I think it might be something that we're hopefully going to do a little more often. But this is just a little glimpse. There's been a whole lot of projects that we've been working on, both internal institutionalization of climate action and incorporation on city plans and projects. So that spans from the budget, making sure that we have some reference to climate change and the impacts of climate on city costs, to the natural hazard mitigation plan and making sure we actually have an action in there that addresses climate mitigation and adaptation.
And our engineering department is looking at, alternative construction techniques to reduce carbon impacts. So Steve is I think speccing warm asphalt mix designs for pavement. So that's certainly some things that they're doing too. So.
And that's Al Gore. I breathed the same air as him. He wore cowboy boots with a suit, and I was just thrilled. Tucked in, pants tucked into the cowboy boots. Wait, what? It was great. Anyways, so there's a lot of great work happening right now. But
and we've encouraged partners, right? So
Yes,
Waverly
absolutely.
Greens put in the largest rooftop solar array in PGE territory last year.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because of the work we're doing, and they're now putting in electric charging stations and creating a process for their residents to work the lease of or purchase of their electric car through their rental contracts. I mean, they're really strongly encouraging electric cars.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Definitely. And a big partnership is with PGE because of this very fast upcoming goal of net zero carbon emissions from electricity. But as Peter and I have been strengthening that relationship and maybe diving into some potentially uncomfortable at times, but they've been great partners, conversations about pushing them to do more and more. We realized that we needed to better clarify this goal simply because especially the electricity sector has a lot of terms to describe electricity. And there's, especially now as renewable electricity, clean, net zero, carbon free, all of these terms sound like they mean the same thing, but they really don't. So that's kind of why today we're hoping to get a little bit of guidance from you guys about how to proceed with some of maybe the city promotional efforts or requests from the utilities to change the grid mix. So right now, you can see on the left, this is how our goal is written in the Climate Action Plan. Net zero electricity by becoming more energy efficient and using renewable electricity sources. Milwaukee's net emissions from electricity are 0. So this does offer some flexibility in what generation methods we find acceptable. But because of these differences of clean, green, renewable, carbon-free, it can change what we're requesting of the utility, and I'll go into that a little bit more about the differences. So hopefully by better defining what we mean, us as staff can better work with our utility partners to clearly request changes and have council support behind that on what we're hoping to achieve for our carbon goals.
Well, I think we need to do it not only for electricity, but also for gas.
Yes, yeah,
Because
and so
there's opportunity to push them in the right direction as well.
Right, and natural gas and energy in general, we're going to define these terms, but like renewable will mean something different to natural gas than it will to electricity. So I think 2040, that discussion around that goal and the intent is definitely to come. And for this one, this is a great point, because this is why we want to clarify what do we mean. So I just wanted to give a brief run through on why it's so complicated and what is renewable electricity. And then maybe a little bit about, you hear the term RECs thrown around as carbon offsets, and those are two different things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So renewable electricity, when we're defining it, that means that the fuel source going into electricity generation is renewable. The concern was around fossil fuels being a limited supply, right? And so they came up with renewable energy or renewable electricity because the source going in is constant, it's renewable. But that doesn't always mean what's coming out, that electricity is carbon free. And so biomass, so burning wood, is an example of a renewable electricity product that isn't carbon-free. So when they were promoting or coming up with renewable electricity, they had this great idea to create a market for the attributes of that renewable electricity, recognizing that that is almost as valuable as electricity being generated itself, those electrons going down the wire. So a market was created to sell the beneficial environmental attributes of renewable electricity separate from electrons, and those are called RECs, renewable energy certificates, because for every megawatt hour that you create of a renewable electricity product, you get one equal REC. So it's like a certificate that goes in hand and you can split them apart. So this is really beneficial, especially if you're in a location where you cannot generate renewable electricity at utility scale, but you still want that benefit of creating renewable electricity. So an example would be Texas has a lot of space for wind farms, but so they can produce a whole lot of wind, where maybe Hawaii, which doesn't have a lot of space for wind farms, or maybe a lot of space in general for a lot of renewable electricity types, they can purchase those RECs from Texas. And that way, in total, their electricity generation with those RECs can come out as carbon neutral. They're getting that value from it.
I mean, you could think of the REC as also the electricity that comes with the REC. That means the electricity is being generated on your behalf. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not necessarily coming directly to you, but it's being generated on your behalf.
And we'll dive into it more in the next slide too. But that's just like a taste of how renewable energy in general works. That's usually when we're referring to renewable energy, we're referring to energy that creates one of these REC products. But some electricity generation types are not renewable, but they don't produce carbon emissions. So large hydro is not a renewable energy. They deem it to have too many environmental impacts to be considered a renewable energy. However, it does not produce carbon at time of generation. A lot of these generation types do produce carbon simply because you're making the windmill, right? It's the life cycle, does have some carbon impacts, but right now we're talking about at time of generation, which is the majority of the lifespan of these generation facilities. So, this highlights, even in just this one slide, you know, there's clean energy, there's green energy, renewable energy, carbon-free, carbon neutral, net zero. Which is why, as staff, when we're trying to make these decisions, we're trying to make the best decision based on what we perceived as the intent of the Climate Action Plan. So that's why we come to you for help. So talking about RECs. So like I said, renewable energy certificates. So this is how we track and trade renewable energy generation, renewable electricity generation, I should say. So 1 megawatt hour equals 1 REC. So it's an independent process. So there's usually a third party that is buying or certifying these renewable energy credits. Usually you hear Green E certified. That's, I would say, I think in the United States from Center for Resource Solutions, the most common program. I'm not sure if I've never seen really another one, but I haven't been looking outside of PGE territory. So as a purchaser, as Peter mentioned, so you own the right to claim the environmental benefits. So it's generated on your behalf. So when you're purchasing a REC, but you're not generating that electricity for that services that turns the light on in your building, it's called an unbundled REC, meaning that it's separate from the electrons. So PGE's green source products, as well as their clean wind products, are unbundled REC products. So it's just the attributes. When you can get the electrons from a renewable electricity facility, as well as that renewable energy credit or certificate, that's a bundled REC product. And both of them are good. I don't want to say that unbundled RECs are not a good product, because it does offer an opportunity for a lot of communities to reduce the amount of total carbon emissions. Carbon offsets, or verified emissions reductions, that's separate from RECs. So when we're talking about different types of carbon production, so there's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 carbon emissions. Scope 1 is like direct emissions from on-site fuel combustion or your vehicle. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from electricity, gas, utilities. And scope 3 is indirect emissions from all other sources of supply chain, commuting, business travel. RECs only target that scope 2 emissions from when you're generating the electricity. Carbon offsets hit both scope 1 and scope 3. Essentially, any other time, you can use a carbon offset to offset the amount of carbon emissions you're producing. And they can vary in projects. There's a lot of really cool projects, from reforesting to really innovative technologies for carbon offsets, and there's a whole different market for purchasing and buying. Some actions we can take as our own community. So planting our urban forest, if we really wanted to go through the certification process for people to buy carbon offsets from the city, we could go through, it's a lot of work. I don't know if we'd want to do that, but we can, for our own emissions, look at that balance and see what are we offsetting as a community based on reforesting our urban forest. So that's kind of why it's complicated around renewable energy versus carbon-free energy.
Well, and so those renewable energy credits, are they incorporating some of those carbon-producing biomass and other things, or are they only
Some do.
non-carbon? Okay.
Yes, so the state, so Green E certified includes what the state considers as a renewable energy source, biomass and biofuels, so like landfills as well. As well as the change in the RPS, so the Renewable Portfolio Standard that the state, that utilities must comply with in increasing the amount of renewables in their portfolio. That also includes some carbon-producing renewable electricity generation.
I mean, there is a lot of discussion, I think, at the climate conference right now about defining biomass, including biomass in the mix of renewable energy. And a lot of people think it's really sort of reckless, because what people are saying, what you're doing is you're substituting trees for coal. And you're losing the benefits that the trees have to sequester carbon, and trees are actually less efficient in producing heat than coal is. So they actually produce, when you burn them, you actually produce more greenhouse gases.
Right, but the difference between that and landfill, right? The landfill is going to happen. I mean, obviously, we can take steps to start to do less of that. But to some degree, landfills, sewage treatment plants are going to happen. Therefore, that methane is going to be produced. Therefore, the use of that methane is preferable because A, it's not ending up in the atmosphere, and B, it's producing energy.
Well, and I think that's why it's important to have these conversations, because in the landfill or the waste treatment case, if we use that as a renewable natural gas product, that would be different than if we were to burn that at the site for electricity generation producing carbon emissions, because there's other options that exist for electricity generation. Natural gas is tricky, especially when we talk about natural gas, it's tricky because there's not a lot of cost-effective options right now. So the question right now is, when we're coming to electricity, can we be more selective and choose to only push forward certain technologies because we recognize that the future is in that direction? Or are we saying, okay, the common understanding is that in life cycle, it's okay, so are we okay with it right now? And that's also why a lot of people are okay with biomass too, so trees, is because of the idea that a tree will sequester carbon in its life cycle naturally, right? And then when we burn it, that carbon is released into the atmosphere. Therefore, it's as if that tree wasn't there to begin with, to sequester it. So that's why it's a carbon neutral process, and why people are comfortable considering it as a renewable electricity. I assume people are comfortable considering it as renewable electricity because in total, it's a carbon neutral life cycle.
I think they're comfortable if they're making wood pellets to burn at biomass facilities.
Yes, that's when they're comfortable, when their profits are good.
Yes, so because it's so complicated about what's carbon-free, what's not carbon-free, what's renewable, what's not renewable, I made this handy little figure to start thinking about it. And so you see in the green there, that's what's renewable and what's allowed in our renewable portfolio standard in Oregon, our RPS. That's also we can get renewable energy certificates from.
What's biogenic?
That's biofuels, biomass, animal waste products.
Okay.
Landfills.
And so that state RPS, that's, I was reading it in your staff report, and I was trying to get my head around whether that's fix, or that's something the state's gonna make raise progressively, and they might drop biomass and biogenic
Well,
in 5 years or something?
They're stair-stepping the percentage that generators, power producers have to meet. As they go to going through 2050. What's in that portfolio, though, right now, they're really sort of using what the EPA definitions are for renewable electricity. So they include those biomass and biogenic sorts of things.
And there have long been business interests advocating for the continued inclusion and perhaps even expansion of those in Oregon.
See,
Where's the downside to biogenic?
well,
So the idea around it is, are we comfortable with loosening the definition, or do we want to tighten it, saying at time of electricity generation there should be no carbon emissions? And I personally, I have an issue with not necessarily animal waste and waste products in the waste stream that way, because dairy digesters and anaerobic digesters are a little different than I think the landfill scale. But I have an issue with the original classification as waste as a renewable fuel.
Like burning trash?
Yes, so capping landfills and using that and relying on that for years to come as a source of electricity. Simply because along with trying to decarbonize our grid, we're also trying to reduce the amount of waste entering the waste stream, and we're trying to reduce the amount of landfills that we need.
Sure.
And so, and while there's so many other viable electricity generation methods, I have a personal issue with moving forward and relying on a landfill as a electricity generation instead of wind or solar.
Right. I'm less thinking of it as relying on it as I am thinking about the methane is going to be produced. To whatever degree we can reduce or not reduce our landfill use, there is still going to be methane produced.
And I see it as
unless we create a process that incentivizes capping and collecting and using, either putting it back in the system if that's possible, or turning it into electricity if it's not, then that won't happen, and we're releasing methane, which is 90 times worse.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I agree that there is value in the gas coming off of landfills. When we're looking at our 2040 goal, I believe that using that as a natural gas replacement and or injecting that back into the gas system is a better solution, simply because there aren't any other solution, or aren't any other cost-effective solutions in that realm. So choosing electricity over the natural gas problem, I think, is limiting opportunities in the future for us.
Sure, it's just a geographic thing.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
yes.
If you don't
yeah.
have a natural gas pipeline within 30 miles of whatever it is you're doing, then it doesn't make any sense to build a natural gas pipeline just to get
Right.
that tiny little bit of, relatively tiny bit
Yeah.
of natural gas that you're producing.
you know, really these questions came up when we started talking with PGE about what they had in the RPS, and the more we learned about what's in the RPS and where they're headed and what products that they have and how are they going to meet our goals in making sure that our electricity is carbon free, you know, we started coming up with these pieces in there that to us we wanted to get some clarification on. So, you know, we took sort of on that renewable definition piece, we took really sort of a conservative approach and said that let's start with not counting things that produce additional greenhouse gas emissions.
Agreed.
But on the other hand, we also said let's take advantage of those generation sources that are carbon free, with the exception of, you don't see nuclear up there. We
Don't
did.
see what?
You don't see nuclear up there.
Right.
We did not include that. But you do see large hydro.
Scale hydro.
Because we want to take advantage of the hydro resources that are in this region that provide carbon-free energy that will help us get to our goals.
Yeah, the carbon footprint of that particular source of electricity has already been spent.
That's right. It's already
So-
there, yep. So we wanted to take advantage of that, but we really wanted to be conservative on those ones that were sort of questionable, that we felt were questionable, sort of the biomass, those things that produce additional greenhouse gas emissions during the production.
So this prompts my question for you, which is, do we want to request, when we're talking to our utilities, request and promote all renewable electricity types or only the carbon-free electricity types for our Milwaukee's net zero future?
Carbon free.
And the nice part is that net zero, that's kind of a, that gives us flexibility in the end game, right? Because we could really, if you're just saying net zero, we could do nothing, change nothing, and then buy an normally expensive amount of renewable energy certificates, and that technically would create a net zero end result. But I don't think that's what the true intention of the climate action plan was.
No, the intention was actually the opposite of that. The intention was to drive the construction of new renewable sources, new wind farms, new solar fields, new.
And our discussions that we've had with PGE, they've asked us to challenge them, and we've challenged them, and they're in the process of constructing the Wheat Ridge Energy Campus, which is going to be a solar, wind, and battery storage facility. They are going to build a solar facility for the Green Future Impact that's going to come online in 2021. So these are all related to, conversations that, not just Milwaukee, but other regional municipalities have with PGE to push them to be a better partner, a cleaner, carbon-free partner. So.
And you don't sense that dropping the carbon generating sources from their RPS is in the cards in the next few years?
I mean, certainly that's an advocacy piece that we would have with the PUC and the state. So, if we want to push the state to increase the RPS, be more aggressive in reaching those goals, and what's considered in the mix, that would be part of that sort of supply side advocacy piece.
But part of what we're trying to do with this answer is make sure that when PGE applies their RPS components to what they're also trying to do for us, that we're excluding anything that can't be included in our portfolio mix. So even if we're not successful on that side, by telling us this, that piece will no longer count, and they'll have to make up for it through another source. I did want to ask Natalie if we go into the rec question, because this is one place where Natalie and I disagree, and I'd like to have a little bit of a debate. Are we going to talk a little bit about that in a future slide, or should we do that now?
We could do that now.
So part of the conversation that came up with PGE when I was in the room with them last month was also what is the role of renewable energy credits, and what percentage of the makeup have to be bundled versus unbundled recs. For me, the reason that a lot of my work, my historical work, was to try and force the companies that I was working with to change, to be different. And so allowing them to go buy a product from another state where they're not constructing or owning or learning how to manage the systems just wasn't attractive to the council. They asked us when we were in the meeting how we felt about unbundled recs. I think it's a stopgap. I think there's a certain percentage of time in here that I would recommend we allow for the staff to negotiate that in. But there is a point when we get to the end goal that there should be no unbundled recs or minimal unbundled recs, because I want them to, the whole reason we're doing this is to push a market forward. And that means I need them to own it. They need to feel and own know how to do the solar installation, know how to manage the wind. And I'm not saying they all have to be produced in state, but they have to be in contracts, power purchase agreements, or other types of negotiations where they actually are taking the full product.
Right. My feeling is similar to that, only slightly different. Mine is that if we are causing them to produce the new energy sources here for us, that wind farm out in Nebraska that somebody invested in anyway is gonna end up going to maybe homes in Nebraska where they're not gonna vote
For
to
this.
kill a coal plant, but it's gonna kill the coal plant because it's gonna be cheaper for them to buy that wind electricity than the coal electricity. So if we allow them to sell us unbundled RECs, that takes away from sort of the natural progression that's occurring in areas that won't be driving this process. Did I
And I
No,
will
you
say-
said that backwards. You mean if we allow them to buy unbundled recs, that fosters the development in areas that won't?
No, so,
You're trying to get as much carbon-free energy to as many people as
Mhm.
possible.
right.
And so the concern is that if we are actually producing carbon but buying RECs to offset ours, and they're taking that carbon-free energy, we're not actually getting the energy we said we wanted in the first place. So why don't we get the bundled, where we build, we own? And in Nebraska, they will end up with a market where the wind is so much cheaper, that there's not a market the same way that there is today for
Exactly.
unbundled RECs, so that they will get the full product to their doorstep, and probably at a comparable rate. So one of the discussions we had with PGE is that they're looking at whether or not this would be a different tariff. Would this be a different rate altogether for a program that we would create for the city? Sorry if I'm jumping too far. I'm not okay saying it's going to be more expensive, because I went through a PPA process with a producer, with Rocky Mountain Power, and for large homes, it was cheaper to buy the solar than it was to buy the coal producing energy. It was partially a fluke. They didn't expect it to happen. It was a great solar resource. But making the assumption in advance that it was going to be more expensive was also part of the problem that's driving this market. So I appreciate that Natalie is much more willing to just get as much into the market as we can. And if we can incentivize that development by buying the unbundled RECs, then great. Just get it built. Keep getting it built. I want PGE to change.
Well, I was
I'm
gonna
really
say,
focused on that.
shouldn't recs, bundled or unbundled, be a stopgap measure? Shouldn't the
Yeah.
goal be have the
100%.
infrastructure here and don't be buying recs?
And there's
That's
clear-
what I'm saying. The
Yeah.
bundled RECs are that.
Okay.
They own the product here, they are producing it here, they are all part of the same system. That's what I want.
And between unbundled and bundled recs, there's a clear winner. Bundled recs are superior. They provide local jobs. They provide local infusion into the economy. It's everything that we want, right? It's more resilient because the generation site is closer to your home. I just want to make sure we don't villainize unbundled
Yeah.
recs, because it's still the result of new infrastructure coming online. You know?
I could not have we built a 1.2 megawatt system on the top of our convention center before it was even close to cost to do so. And we did it by unbundling the RECs. We sold the renewable energy credits to get influx of cash to be able to actually construct the installation. There are some seriously good reasons to do it. And at the time, it was so cost prohibitive that we just simply wouldn't have built without it. I think we're in a different place today than we were 12 years ago. And so that's why I'm just saying, I'd like us to push as hard as we can to the 2035 goal with bundled, not unbundled, knowing that there'll be stopgap measures over that time.
And the other thing too, that we don't want to happen, that happens, like Idaho Power actually they sell so many of their RECs that they actually, and send out, some of their hydro to Montana and Wyoming, that they actually import coal power. So, we want to make sure that, our utility, PGE, the investments that they're making in their power generation infrastructure is for generation that's going to benefit our region, and they're not buying coal somewhere else to
Backfill.
backfill.
Right, yeah, if we get a community solar project up and running, do we want that to then lead to PGE buying coal somewhere else because they've figured out how to sell those benefits on the market? This is a long-standing issue
Yeah.
with renewable energy credits in general.
And
Well, that's
the
what
ro-
I was wondering, because, I mean, I don't know that much about them, but it seems to me like, is this marketplace of these RECs a deterrent or a impediment to community solar? Is it part of why those things
No,
aren't
it's,
moving?
it's part
No?
of community solar. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how a lot of places use it, because you're able to unbundle your RECs and sell that to somebody else to as an investment, in fact, in some
One of
cases.
the pieces that's really great in our Blue Sky program out of Rocky Mountain Power in Salt Lake, you would buy in like you would Green Source here, they would end up with an overabundance of cash, where it actually wasn't. They would end up with more money than they could get the RECs or needed the RECs to be able to offset the energy load. They then reinvested all that money into solar installations across the valley so that people would actually see the renewable product on the ground. So there are different pieces to all of this, and all of the pieces are really important. I just want to be able to have your blessing to go into Rocky Mountain Power and say, when we hit this goal, thank you. Well, funny enough, Pacificor and Rocky Mountain Power are actually the same company. So we're actually having conversations about the same company as well, just not for our portfolio. But yes, I want to be able to look at PGE and say, by the time we hit this goal, we're asking you to do bundled only. And it's going to be hard, it could be more expensive, but this is the goal and we want to try and get there.
So what just because I want to spend some time on the cool carbon calculator we have. So what I'm hearing is that we want bundled rec products for our future. And we're okay with some unbundled rec products right now, acknowledging their benefits, but the push is for a bundled rec product for Milwaukee. And
I just want to throw a little bit of water on
Go
that,
for it.
because the RECs are so interwoven with the market. So the RPS, the Regional Portfolio Standard, allows
Yep.
the utility to use unbundled RECs to meet those goals. So
So the
they're-
negotiation may be that the gaps, the stopgap that we do, have to all be bundled. The RPS goal does not, within our percentage of the portfolio, because we won't be able to entirely control the RPS. So I appreciate that clarification. What I'm really talking about is the gap.
Yeah.
What they do for us, if we're really going to come up with a solution, then that solution needs to be a true installation that we get both sides of the attribute.
Well, and I think it also further incentivizes PGE to really think about the fact that that's how they are fulfilling the RPS. You know, if it's another place where we create market demand that's clearly pushing for the best possible deployment of renewables.
And the Green Future Impact that we signed up for is a bundled product.
Yep. But the one that I have access to as a resident is
Is
not.
not, yeah.
And it's really frustrating to me. So I think that is a long-term conversation that we'll want to have with them. And that's part of why, as we're looking at being able to aggregate the whole population as a purchaser, it's really important to me that we get some strong bundled RECs into that portfolio.
So at what point are we going to talk about the fact that 2035, 2040, and 2050 are no longer?
On January 11th at your retreat. We do actually have a staff component, but that is your goal. That's the discussion about the goal you set. So we have that as a part of the agenda to talk about at your retreat.
Okay.
So now, in just like a very short amount of time, carbon-free versus renewable, how comfortable are we with including products that have biomass or biofuels or biogeneration? And it could be, I need to learn more about it before I say anything. But just when we have discussions with PGE, when they're coming up with products for Milwaukee, a lot of them would, without thinking about it, include stuff like that, because it is a state-approved renewable. But we can have some sway and say, no, we want all solar, or all wind, or just wind, solar, and small hydro.
I mean, my thoughts on it were that we were going to exclude the biomass from our mix. And we could certainly spend some time to review the the biogas piece as part of that electric generation. Not necessarily rule it out. It's a very small component anyway.
Right, my interest in that is, so I don't know who's aware of it, but the sewage treatment plant in Gresham is net zero now. And they are net zero because they're collecting what they call fog, fats, oils, and greases from a broader area. They are bringing that into their plant, and then all the similar product, they're then creating electricity from that's running their plants. And so they are a net zero plant. Gresham's big enough they could afford to invest the $2 million it takes to do that. And they'll have that paid off in like 3 years because they're saving about $900,000 a year on electricity. I think if we're willing to have that as part of our mix, and then therefore PGE is willing to invest in those kinds of things at other sewage treatment plants or
I think that's part of the conversation
dairies or
on,
whatever.
is it utility scale generation, right? I'm thinking a large biomass power plant, right?
Yeah, no.
Different than a small local facility that is closing the loop.
Yeah.
I think we'd all support, and correct me if I'm wrong, we'd all support it if it was a local, like if Kellogg Wastewater said that that's what they want to do. I think we would, in general, support it. But if they wanted to open up a large biomass site in Oregon City, and which will power X amount of homes, right, outside of Oregon City, that's what we're saying on that scale. We don't.
No.
Yeah, that runs into a host of equity issues, and,
Yeah.
and I don't know that PGE is the right utility to really be exploring biogas generation anyway. I would rather see that conversation happening with Northwest Natural if we're having
Yes.
it at all.
Great. So it sounds like we'll pursue it. We'll still talk to people about it, and in the meantime, promote small scale, especially if it's localized and especially if it's closing the loop for individual facility. But we want to make sure we pressure Northwest Natural in particular to exploring those technologies. Great.
Before you move on to this,
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you about the offset piece in the natural gas world, because I had Northwest Natural at my door last week trying to sell me a offset piece
So
for
their
natural gas.
their offset program, so I think it's clean energy, smart energy I think is what their residential program is. I'm not sure what their business program. That's creating dairy digesters for the most part on farms. That's considered an offset because they are capturing the emissions that would have come out from using that waste in a landfill or putting it into some sort of slurry. And so it's a really cool program. I had conversations with Northwest Natural's government affairs, their new government affairs person, about the fact that there aren't any dairy digesters in Milwaukee. And so it's not necessarily a local solution. So I think that there's a lot of other carbon offsets that hopefully we can push Northwest Natural to take advantage of that can benefit directly the Milwaukee community. It's still a really cool program. I'm happy they have something like that and they're promoting the conversation. But I think that there's other opportunities. But I do want to make sure
You
we
have
don't
5 minutes.
Yeah. That's and so hopefully you guys took a look at your staff report and saw the carbon accounting calculator. This is just to make sure we're looking, while we start making these decisions and having conversations, we know what our trajectory is in a business as usual situation with the changes happening at the Oregon RPS scale and the changes PGE is making. It helps us figure out a gap that we need to close with different options. So the end of the calculator, essentially the highlight is there's a 33% carbon gap to close. We still have to figure out a solution to cover 33% of Milwaukee's electricity usage. This counts for energy efficiency improvements from the PGE Energy Trust of Oregon scale, so not necessarily the City of Milwaukee scale like our Home Energy Score program. It also includes some load growth based on PGE's estimations of electrification of transportation and some conservative population growth. But we did only include carbon-free energy in this calculator, so 33% gap to close, excluding biomass and biofuels, which are a renewable product in the RPS. It's a small, though. I think a green source is something like 4% biomass, I think, is what they estimate. So it is, the numbers won't change too drastically if we do include those. But this is what it looks like, and that gray on top is the additional needed to close. It's still quite a bit. You know, we do have to do a lot of work. We can't just assume that we'll be fine at the end, and that's my takeaway from this. When I'm looking at it, it just really solidifies the need that we need to act, and we need to do something, which we are. We've been looking at some potential solutions. The highlights include localized energy efficiency outreach. So there's Energy Trust of Oregon incentives that we can do a better job promoting within the Milwaukee community. Home energy score programs, so residential and commercial energy benchmarking and scoring programs. Leveraging smart grid test bed, so that's leveraging energy efficiency education at the home level. There's also, we had discussions about building codes and advocating for stricter energy efficiency requirements in building code, state building code. There's supply side policy advocacy, and that's for the RPS changes, so saying, hey, we don't think this is fast enough, we want more. There's collaboration with regional partners, so working tighter with PGE, Northwest Natural, pretty much everyone who would be willing to listen to us and telling them how it's important to our community. And really, actually, a good one is promotion of PGE's renewable products. They are unbundled right now, but I think the latest Green Future Impact products show that there's demand for bundled RECs and bundled REC products. And so really promoting those when we get the opportunity and increasing the amount of usage in Milwaukee. And then exploration into community scale PGE products. So I wish we had more time to talk about this, but this is something we'll have to bring back to you guys because it is a really good conversation. PGE heard a bunch of communities talking about Utah House Bill 411, the Community Renewable Energy Act. And the fact that communities want to be able to advocate for renewable energy products within the community. PGE was like, oh, well, I think we can do that. And so they started exploring, and they've been affectionately calling it Muni Green, which I think is awesome. Essentially, what it would be is taking their existing products that they offer, and when you get a new electricity account, when you move to Milwaukee, you have to call them and say, by the way, I want this renewable energy project. I have to take that effort to call in and say, sign me up. What this would do is it would offer a community the opportunity to make an opt-out program, saying if you open up an electricity account within Milwaukee, you're automatically enrolled in the renewable energy product, and you can unenroll yourself if you don't want it. We've been talking about PGE, about what that product would look like, making sure it's cost effective, but it's also matching the values that we're projecting through our climate action plan and as a community. And that's a fine balance we have to play. Obviously, with Green Future Impact, they saw the cost was way less than they were predicting originally. We don't know if that's what the future holds, we hope. But this is why this conversation is really important, because as they start developing a product like this, a tariff, and start coming up with these products that communities can choose from, we want one that represents the values of the community and the true intent of the climate action plan. And so these are some of the options that we're looking at to close that gap. And we're, of course, open for any ideas or suggestions. In the next years or so, I think energy will be a big focus of my own position. Energy utility resiliency and urban forests, because I think those are the biggest bang for our buck as a community. And I think we can actually make it.
Just one quick thing I wanted to mention. So this carbon accounting calculator that we use, we're like the only customer, big municipality that PG serves that's done something like this, that has a climate action plan to look at how we're going to get there, what's the gap in 2035 if, we're sort of at a business as usual and not making any changes to the products that PGE has. So.
I will say in almost every conversation we have with PGE, or this was with Good Company, they say, oh, no one's ever asked us that before. Or, oh, you guys are the first ones to ask that question. And I think it's because we know that our resources are valuable and we want to make the best decisions with the time we have. So
It's interesting that Portland's not asking those questions.
They are now.
So I wanted to go back to that, it's actually not on the slide at all, but the discussion about building efficiency. Mm-hmm. Buildings are a huge part of Milwaukee's carbon
Yeah.
footprint, and our electricity sources are obviously a serious contender in making that such
Yeah.
a big piece. We were all part of a conversation on Friday around things we might do to improve building code at state level, and I just wanted to provide some direction from the dais that that's a really great opportunity, and absolutely PGE is where your focus needs to be, and there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there, and it's a great partnership. But we have some opportunities that I think are largely incumbent upon those of us who are the elected officials, but it may require a little staff's time as well.
Can I just
Yeah, yeah.
briefly speak to that? So there's a couple things on that, and that's advocating for more improved building energy codes with the state. So I think we have the capacity to do that with a couple things in mind, though. So one, we would need that Zero Coalition really to do the technical heavy lift on developing the code and also facilitating the discussion with the other communities. That would be part of that process.
And Zero Coalition is Zero Energy Ready Oregon Coalition.
We don't have the capacity
Yeah.
to manage that process, but we can go to the meetings and represent Milwaukee and report back to council and integrate and with our community development and building officials to make sure that we're meeting those goals there. But even with that in mind, there's still that's still some work. So I think the one thing that I think we would have to sort of drop off for the time being would be that commercial benchmarking piece of what would follow after the home energy score. Just because that seems like a heavier lift than originally thought, based off of the discussion that we actually had at the workshop. And it may not necessarily provide the
it's not
Carbon
causing a huge
savings.
shift.
it's not
Right,
causing a
yeah.
huge shift.
We don't have huge commercial buildings
Yeah.
in the way that some of our
But
partners in
then
the region do.
The question I wanted to ask was, and how much effort are you guys putting into taking this data and going and having those, are people going and having those conversations with those building owners? Right? Is there an
Is Portland doing
interactive
that?
piece
Yeah.
to it? Or is it just they're handing out this information?
Do you mean the carbon calculator, or do you mean the benchmark?
The benchmarking.
Yeah, I'm not sure. From my understanding, there's a conversation between Energy Trust of Oregon, which has those commercial industrial incentives, and them utilizing that data to open up that conversation. I'm not 100% sure that that's how the flow of information goes.
We did identify the advocacy for the building energy code is in our 2-year work plan. But the process that they're talking about is a little bit more cumbersome than what we originally envisioned. But I think we can spend the time by shifting that energy benchmarking piece.
Well, and it was clear to me from those conversations that elected officials have a big role to play there. So my hope would be that it's not a big burden on staff time, and I agree that that's a good place to have a little give in the work
Yeah.
plan.
I do too.
Well, that's pretty much what we wanted to bring you today, and of course, there's going to be continued work, so stay tuned. You can always go to MilwaukeeClimateAction.com to learn more.
Awesome. Great job, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Take
few
a
minutes.
5-minute break. Did the gavel come?
Should I recuse myself before we?
Actually,
yeah.
can I, really quick,
Okay.
so no.
I'll do it
Wait, a
after.
5-minute break.
5-minute break.